Hey, what's up, you guys? It's been a really long time since I've done any videos. I've been doing a lot of tracking and mixing for a lot of artists lately. So today, what I want to do is a quick little video about how I like to make interesting telephone effects. So we have here is a session where I actually use this effect to make everything sound kind of weird and washy and kind of creepy. So I'm just going to play this for you real quick.
These voices in my mind, voices in my mind, thoughts of homicide, thoughts of homicide. These voices in my mind speaking thoughts of homicide. These voices in my mind speaking thoughts of homicide. Feel like we running out of time, running out of time. Feel like we running out of time. The whole world's dying. Voices in my mind speaking thoughts of homicide. These voices in my mind speaking thoughts of homicide. Feel like we running out of time, running out of time. Feel like we running out of time. The whole world's dying.
This is a track called Voices from Scratch LDP. So basically, I did this mix a long time ago, and I kind of was just messing around with it just to do a kind of rework. And I was kind of thinking about these background vocals, right? Technically, these are background vocals that were overdubbed on each other, right? So technically, when they're put together, since they're overdubs, they're not perfectly on time. And they're not actually, they kind of chorus slightly. So if I solo these out and just play them from right here.
Thoughts of homicide. These voices in my mind speaking thoughts of homicide. These voices in my mind speaking.
So as you can see that when they're monoed up, they kind of chorus. So what I like to do is I like to pan them out because of that. So they have a nice stereo feel since they're kind of off time. And if there's some to mono, they still sound different because they're not the same. But what I like to do extra is add a cool little telephone effect to make them sound really weird and sound kind of pop out more, like as you can hear in the mix. So basically, we're going to go over how I like to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just copy this plugin up, bypass this, and we'll go over this and we'll set this at a factory default. This is my Metric Halo Channel Strip 3 preset, right? My EQ is always before the compressor, so when you have this pink thing that says post EQ, it moves the compressor section to after the EQ. So when I want to do a telephone effect, the first thing I do is like take that off. That basically makes it so the compressor, as you can see, is moved before the EQ. Then I make sure that I activate the internal sidechain, because what people like to often do is they like to really compress and kind of like make it like the vocal extremely, extremely compressed, and then you EQ it, and then they compress it again, and then they telephone it. And this, I find, uses less plug-in slots, and it's kind of quicker to do. So what I do is I turn on the sidechain, I hit listen, right? And then I change the internal detector circuit to a high-pass filter. And I listen to the circuit, which is right here. And basically, I'm listening to what the compressor is going to listen to, and what it listens to is what it's going to compress. So everything that it doesn't hear, it's going to not compress at all. So we're going to take a quick listen.
Thoughts of homicide. These voices in my mind speaking thoughts of homicide. These voices in my mind speaking thoughts of homicide.
So usually what I'm doing is I'm going to be listening for that, and I'm going to be like, okay, that means that everything under 374 hertz is going to completely bypass the compression. And usually why I'm doing that is because people will put an EQ before and make the vocals sound the way they want it to sound, and then they compress it. Then they can do the telephone effect, because what you want is you want it the level to stay consistent. But this way is so much easier. Any compressor nowadays has a sidechain internal circuit. Pro Tools stock channel strip has one. Pro Tools stock compressor has one. I just kind of like the way this one looks. Anyway. So after that, then I set up a nice little ratio. And I like to use something like Smooth or Warm because it's got an extremely soft knee. And I set this to kind of quick, and I set the release to relatively fast. And I usually kind of leave them stock because they kind of sound good. So now I'm going to listen to this.
Thoughts of homicide. These voices in my mind speaking thoughts of homicide. These voices in my mind speaking thoughts of homicide. Thoughts of homicide. These voices in my mind speaking thoughts of homicide.
So it looks like I'm getting about maybe 5 to 6 dBs of compression on a regular basis. Actually, what you do on a telephone effect is you want to make sure you have almost no dynamics so that it doesn't like lose volume while it's playing. This way you keep the vocal consistent and it always sounds the same. So after I bring up the makeup gain, you're going to hear that the low end has been boosted a lot because the only thing that was compressed was the top end.
Thoughts of homicide. These voices in my mind speaking thoughts of homicide. These voices in my mind speaking thoughts of homicide.
So then what I do to counteract that is I activate the EQ, right? And this is when I do my telephone effect. So a telephone effect is basically when you get the EQ and you make a bandpass filter and then you do a big peak at one frequency to make it kind of sound telephony. So what I usually do is I have the high pass filter or the low cut and I bring it up to basically around 400.
Thoughts of homicide. These voices in my mind speaking.
So it's starting to sound a little tinny, right? Then I get the low pass or the high cut and I'm going to do it around 5K, right?
Thoughts of homicide. These voices in my mind speaking thoughts of homicide. These voices in my mind speaking thoughts of homicide.
Cool. So now we're getting a really filtered sound. So now I want to have something with a really high Q, right? And I just find something around the frequency where the human voice is. So maybe around 1.8 to 2K. And we're going to boost that a lot, right? So I'm going to probably go for around like almost 2K. And I'm going to make it a little bit wider because we want to get something so it doesn't sound phasey. We'll boost it about 10K.
Thoughts of homicide. These voices in my mind speaking thoughts of homicide. These voices in my mind speaking thoughts of homicide.
So I think to me it sounds a little bit more telephony like that.
Thoughts of homicide. These voices in my mind speaking thoughts of homicide. These voices in my mind speaking thoughts of homicide.
So if you notice right there while it was playing, I turned off the compressor, and as you can hear from that, you get not only do you get a level drop, but you also get a fluctuation where things get loud and then quiet. So what I might want to also do, since it's still pretty dynamic, is I'm gonna actually compress it even more. I'm gonna just increase the ratio to about like 8:1. It's almost 8:1. Maybe even make it a little bit quicker and the release a little slower.
Thoughts of homicide. These voices in my mind speaking thoughts of homicide.
So you get everything more unison, which is really cool. Then what I like to do is I like to set up a delay, a really, really quick delay. So it's basically just really, really, really quick. So I'm doing about 12th notes, it looks like, right? And then I just pan it out and I have them follow the pan and I just turn it on and we'll listen to these now together.
Thoughts of homicide. These voices in my mind speaking thoughts of homicide. These voices in my mind speaking thoughts of homicide.
Right? Versus how they sounded like without any effects on them.
Thoughts of homicide. These voices in my mind speaking thoughts of homicide.
So I think you get a really cool, interesting tone to them. So what we can do now is we can actually turn on these effects on how they were, how I had them set up, right? And we'll listen to them in the mix and then we'll take them out and we'll see what it sounds like.
Thoughts of homicide. Thoughts of homicide. These voices in my mind speaking thoughts of homicide. These voices in my mind speaking thoughts of homicide.
Cool. So now that what we'll do is we will take out the effect and we'll see how that sounds like.
Thoughts of homicide. Thoughts of homicide. These voices in my mind speaking thoughts of homicide. These voices in my mind speaking thoughts of homicide.
So I think it sounds pretty good without the effect, right? But it sounds kind of like a little muffly. It sounds like you're going to need to do a lot to the vocal to make them sound separate. But I also find like it kind of leaves something to be desired. It kind of doesn't give it like a nice texture. It just kind of makes it sound like there's a bunch of vocals saying the same word. But with this effect, if you listen to it now, it kind of adds a texture and makes it kind of sound interesting. There's something different and it's fluctuating throughout each ear.
Thoughts of homicide. Thoughts of homicide. These voices in my mind speaking thoughts of homicide. These voices in my mind speaking thoughts of homicide. We running out of time, running out of time. But like we running out of time, the whole world's dying.
So there you go, a really quick idea of how I like to do a telephone effect. I also really like to use this soft tube delay, and a lot of it is because you can drive it. So I'm also doing a lot of distortion that's being added to it, but since it's really like tube based, it's smooth. Also, these quick like little delay times is pretty cool because it gives it a nice little emphasis when you have it as a send. So it kind of sounds like it bounces, especially if it's overdubbed like this. Because none of them are on time perfectly when it's panned out, it sounds really cool and interesting. And you have one that sticks out a little longer, and then one that'll be set a little bit off time, and it kind of adds this constant like texture, this like game between your ears. So that's it for today. Hope this was interesting. I hope you guys like this. Let me know if you guys have any questions or if you guys have anything you guys want to see. And that's about it for today. Later.